unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Paris Flammonde, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels or City of Demons, depending on who you ask. We are internationally syndicated, starting with L&M late night in the Midlands in the United States, as well as the terrestrial affiliates, and in the United Kingdom, deprogrammed radio, plus their stations in London and Leeds, and the people listening in the EU, not to mention all the other countries people are hearing. So wherever you are, I want to wish you a good day or good evening, good night, or good morning. Now, as promised, we always bring you quality programming and quality guests. Now, this guest is not just a guest. He's also a host. He is also a very good friend of mine. When I was literally near death and was supposed to be dead, he, all the way across the country, was working with me and trying to get me healed, and was always bringing me positive energy and doing things that the Western medicine does not do, because, of course, it's all a money business. So that's a little private side I wanted to tell you about, but that's also the appreciation I have for this one guest. If you haven't seen it in the promotion, which you should have, because he is posted, of course, on social media and, of course, my website, well, then you must know who he is then. If not, I might as well introduce him, the one and only Mr. Robert Morningstar. Robert, welcome back, my dear friend.
Thank you, John. It's great to hear your voice on the air.
It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Like I said, on and off air, especially when we talked last night, and I got a very different insight from you that I've never actually even considered. And that might be we might start with that point right there. JFK. And before we go into why he was killed, and I was explaining to you, from physics standpoint, if someone is hit, depending on if they're shot from, say their front, you would expect their body to jerk to the backwards. But that's not what happened in the Zapruder film. They claim that, one, he was hit from behind, and therefore his head exploded and his brain was exploded. And secondly, some magic physician said that the physics don't apply for him because instead of jerking forward, he jerked backwardly. And that obviously sparked an entire conversation, which I'm going to let you go into it, but it had something to do with if you have Scotch tape with the 5 fingers. Yeah. So let's talk about that real quick.
Sure. Well, basically, as you know, Dr. J, and the audience that follows me, I have had the pleasure of turning 70 last month, 70 orbits of the sun, and I've seen history. I was an eyewitness to history, and the death of John F. Kennedy is a central event in my life. And the aftermath as well is very vivid. The whole nation was fooled by the Mockingbird media. Every aspect of the JFK assassination was sanitized. And that's the right word, because it was a very, very dirty, filthy act, both before, during, and after. But everybody has a reason for being born. And I always sought that reason. And ultimately, when I was about 42, the real reason for me being born fell upon me. That's how destiny is. And that came about when I discovered that the Zapruder film is a consciously engineered optical illusion and basically a mass hallucination. And the reason it was I who discovered it was that I was trained in psychology at Fordham University, but I specialized at Fordham. My particular interest was in Gestalt psychology, the psychology of human perception, how humans form an idea by organizing the information that you gather mostly visually So with that background, I found a pristine copy of the Zapruder film. I actually copied it from a broadcast, and it was the best one ever. And a couple of months later, I had this in my archive, and William Cooper's comment that the driver shot the president came to my attention. I said, that's impossible. And I started to study the film. And in studying the film, I kept slowing it down and slowing it down. Now, this is in videotape, and in 1992, I had the best Panasonic camcorder that you could buy. And it had still frame and slow motion, and it had a syncing wheel, so you could synchronize it perfectly, so every frame was perfectly clear. So I started studying that scene where the driver purportedly turned around and shot the president, which again is an optical illusion. But something was removed from that section. And the reason I know is that in the course of watching the film, I saw splice marks going by. Splice marks that should not be anywhere on the film. And I first came across it in studying the passage of the car past the sign, where the sign itself is cut and pasted and repasted, and they inserted partial frames to create the illusion of continuity. And by that I mean this. The limousine came around the corner wide. The right wheel of the limousine hit the curb, climbed up, fell down. It was in the left lane, and the driver had to straighten it out, move it back into the center lane. When he went into the center lane, he noticed that the bridge, the railroad bridge ahead of him, was full of people, completely against Secret Service rules because he was driving in an open car, and anyone could throw a rock, a tomato, or a bomb down onto the president or take a shot at him. So he hesitated. He slowed the car. He slowed the car and slowed the car so slowly that the car crawled down the street at 11.4 miles per hour. That's the fastest that it went until after the shooting, after the killing at the grassy knoll. Then it really took off. So I started counting the splices. I found splices between frame 99 and what should be 100. I found splices at 130, at 155 and 56, at 207, 212. Notice the numbers I'm saying, 27, 212. There's a big gap there. That's the first gap that I discovered.
Huge.
Then a whole sequence of deletions that occurred at the grassy knoll. And what Dr. J is referring to with the Scotch tape and the 5 fingers is this analogy to describe to you how the editors of the Zapruder film altered a film that showed 5 shots hitting the president. One in the back between the shoulder blades that made him stand up in the car and scream or yell out, "Oh my God," and he fell back down into the seat. Then, this is the scene where the car comes out from behind the sign. Then the president is hit in the throat. Those are 2 shots. Then you go down the road a bit and they pass a lamppost. At that point in the lamppost passage, it has been edited. There were 2 lampposts along the road. And as the first lamppost came into view, they cut the film, cut everything that happened between the 2 lampposts, then joined the film when the second lamppost came in to make you believe that the lamppost is the only lamppost. But what you're seeing is actually 2 lampposts joined in the middle, deleting all that happened between the passage of the car between the 2. Now we get to the grassy knoll. At the grassy knoll, there are so many splices in the Zapruder film that other experts who researched it after I discovered it have come forward and say that between frame 313 and 314, about 40 frames have been removed. Between the next few frames, another 40. The total count is about 122 frames have been removed only at that sequence at the grassy knoll. So here's what happened. 3 shots hit the president at the grassy knoll. And now, if you'll bear with me, audience listening, do this with me. Look at your left hand, palm facing you. Spread your fingers apart. Each of your fingers represents a point where a shot was fired at the president and actually hit the president. Okay? The thumb is the back shot. The index finger is the throat shot. The three remaining fingers are three shots that crisscrossed President Kennedy's head within a half a second at the grassy knoll, half a second to 1 second time. They were all synchronized. They all fired almost at the same time. But distances and reaction times being what they were, they couldn't arrive at exactly the same moment. And the film captured this. It captured the arrival of 1, 2, 3. So how do you take a film that shows 5 shots causing 11 wounds? How do you edit that film to produce only 2 shots, which is the Warren Commission magic bullet theory? Okay, so here's how you do it. Imagine a piece of Scotch tape, but the tape represents the film, and the film has a series of 8mm frames. Okay, but you put the Scotch tape from one finger to the next, all across the tips, right? So they're covered in Scotch tape. Now that represents the film, and the space between your fingers is the space between the arrival of the shots. Okay, so you want to edit the scene at the sign. That's where you get shot in the back and then got shot in the throat. Okay, so you take the scissors, you cut the tape between your thumb and your index finger. Now there's no tape. Now touch your fingers to each other. The film is now joined, and 2 shots have been turned into 1 by that simple splice. Come down to the grassy knoll. First shot rings out, blasts open the right forehead of the president. Second shot, and this explosion of the right forehead of the president was so horrible that the head opened up, and it's almost in the description of the people and the person who really saw the original film and people who saw the real event. It was like a pink atomic bomb came up vertically straight up out of the president's head, and a white cloud appeared over his head, a bright white cloud. The blood went up into the air. In that moment when that shot hit and opened up the front, from the grassy knoll came in with it onto the trunk and even beyond to hit a motorcycle policeman and make an eyewitness who was standing there seeing the piece of the head flying right straight back at him. So, and then the third shot from the opposite side, or some people say from the sewer, opened up, and a third shot went through, further opening up and lifting the scalp and just tearing the head wide open. In those moments, the president's brain was completely liquefied. The right hemisphere was basically gone, evaporated. Okay, so how do you take those 3 shots and turn it into 1? Well, you take a pair of scissors, you cut the film right where your middle finger, first shot at the grassy knoll is. Then you cut it at the ring finger and join those 2. Then you still have the pinky and the ring finger, right? Can you do this? Can you hold it? You're pinching your pinky, pinching your thumb and your index finger, and you're putting your middle finger and ring finger together, and you still have the pinky hanging out there. That's the third shot, either the sewer shot or the transverse shot from the south side of the elm. So you cut the film right there at the ring, and you cut it at the pinky, and you put those 3 fingers together, and you just turned 5 shots into 2 by deleting major frames and segments of the Zapruder film. That is what makes the Zapruder film an optical illusion. This optical illusion took a car that was moving at 11.4 miles an hour at its highest speed until the shooting happened, the killing happened, and it stopped twice. It stopped completely at the sign, and then it crawled to the grassy knoll, and then it stopped at the grassy knoll, and what I have described to you then ensued. Then it took off. But after it took off, Jackie Kennedy jumped on the back of the trunk, and she went to retrieve a piece of the president's skull and brain that fell there. And that was edited. Because in the deletion of the frames that I described, the 3 shots, deletion, there were motions that Jackie made during that time, which were out of sync. They are temporal anomalies. The body isn't moving correctly in it's actually moving in impossible ways. Let me describe something. In 2013, on the very anniversary of the assassination, I discovered a version of the Zapruder film that had extra frames in it. Because there are many iterations, many versions of the Zapruder film. This was a very early one where they had doctored up the first part, but they hadn't gotten so much into the last part. And during that part, when Jackie heard the president, she heard him first, gurgling when he was shot in the throat. Horrible noises. She turned to look at him and saw him in distress. So she sidled up to him. She moved across the seat of the car. They were on opposite ends of a wide Lincoln Continental. So she sidled up over to him. She put her arms around him and saying, "Jack, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And in that moment, when she had her arms around him, that first shot opened up at the front of his head, and she winced, and then she looked around, knowing he'd been shot. And then she saw the second shot go through the hole and take out the back of his head. And she actually made an arm movement, a reflex like a cat. She tried to catch the piece of the head that was flying off as it flew by. Just like a first baseman taking a fast pickoff play. I mean, just instant reaction. And then she missed it. And then she went into shock. But even in her shock, she moved like a cat. She turned in her seat. She turned on her right hip. She kneeled on her left knee. She crawled out like a cat. She grasped the piece of the head. And then the car accelerated and almost threw her off the car. What happened was she was going to slide off the car, and the Secret Service man, Clint Hill, arrived just in time to take her like a duffel bag and shove her back into the back seat. All that has been cut out of the Zapruder film. It's an optical illusion. It is the greatest lie the world has ever seen. It is bad for your mind to see it because it leaves your mind in a state of cognitive dissonance. The Zapruder film makes no sense. Listen to what I just said. We had a car that was moving at 11.4 miles per hour and stopped 2 times. And we see a car that comes, you know what? You don't see a car that comes around the corner. It's an illusion. An illusion is created in you that you think you see the car coming around the corner with the motorcycles. But those are a product of the first 3 or 4 edits that I described, that Z99, Z130, Z165, and so on. But the method of editing was brilliant. It was diabolically brilliant. And by this, I mean that it was no ordinary splicing that was done. It was not just taking the film and cutting it here and joining it and cutting it there and joining it. They knew that if they did that, the temporal anomalies, the bodies out of sync, discrepancies in time and motion would be evident. So if you removed, let me say this, they removed 10 frames. In order to, between the first frame and the 10th frame, that's actually a lot of time. It's a little bit more than half a second, if you believe the estimates of the FBI on the speed of the film. So if you excise those 10 frames, it's going to be a big jump between frame number 1 and frame number 11. So what they did is they go into the middle of the film and slice out 1 frame from the mean, you know, the midsection of the film. Then they took that frame and they cut it. They cut it in a very special way. They cut it in a way that it would show about 60%, 0.68% of a frame, with the top of the frame having the remaining 0.38%. Right? So this is a kind of a, not a half and half frame. It's kind of an unbalanced frame, but it's in a proportion. And the key is the proportion, what I just said. 0.618 to 0.38, because that's the golden mean. they cut the frame using the golden mean, which is the formula that nature uses to grow things organically. The venation of leaves, the way leaves sprout out on branches, the formula for the spiral. This is the Fibonacci series as well. So they carved out several frames in that manner, some of them with the 0.38 at the top, the narrow part at the top, and some of them with the narrow part at the bottom. And in this way, they were able to fool the human eyes, including my own. Mine eyes were fooled from 1968 when I first saw it, but my eyes were fooled, but my soul was not. By this, I'm going to explain. They can fool your intellect, they can fool your eyes, but when those two things are fooled, there's another faculty, another sense in our bodies that warns us, you are being fooled. This does not make sense. And this is how I knew. When CBS showed the film for the first time, not in its entirety, they didn't show the headshot. This was Dan Rather showing it around 1968 or 69 for one time on the anniversary. Now, this is 5 years later. They've already had time to work on the film. And the film starts to roll, and I'm watching at 7 o'clock. And I'm glued to the TV set because JFK was my hero. JFK was my older brother in my feelings for him. So I'm watching the killing of my hero. So I'm glued, 100% attention. And as the car passed by the sign, I blinked. I couldn't believe it. I blinked and I missed something. And I was upset. I was like, hey man, how could, I talked to myself. Hey man, how could you blink at that moment? You were concentrating so hard. Oh, lucky you, they're going to show it again at the 11 o'clock news because they always repeated the 7 o'clock news at 11 o'clock. Yes. So I said, I'm going to stay up till 11 and watch it. So at 11 o'clock, I'm in the darkened room, glued to the TV set, kneeling there about, I would say, 4 feet, 5 feet at the most away from the set because I like the big screen effect. And I'm concentrating and I'm watching, and lo and behold, the car passes the sign and I blinked again. The whole room went dark and I blinked. Now remember what I said, all the lights were out, the television was on, and I'm staring at this TV set and everything went black. And then I saw the TV and I blinked at exactly the same time. And then I got sick. Something churned up in my stomach. Something wasn't making sense. But I'll tell you, my rational and logical brain insisted, the only way that could happen is you blinked. You missed something again. But how could you blink at exactly the same moment? Well, to make a long story short, that was a work in progress in the doctoring of the Zapruder film. I've described to you how the sign was cut and spliced and joined. I have that version. But in 1968, they hadn't gotten to that stage, and they knew they couldn't show the back of the sign as damaged as it was by A, bullets that went through it, and B, the cutting of the film. So what CBS did is they inserted a completely black frame between Z207 and 214, really, where they call it 212. But they inserted that black frame. The film was running. I was concentrating. The film went black, and I thought I blinked. But the reaction I had, this I can tell you now because I found that version of the film and I can explain how it happened to me. I walked away with a really nauseous feeling in my stomach and a sickening feeling and a sense of deep shame. Because, folks, I pride myself on my intellect, my skills, my perception. And I've always been that way. I trust my eyes. And this said, you can't trust your eyes, you can't trust your reflexes. So I felt puzzled, ashamed, and the shame was that I didn't have this discipline to keep my eyes open. And they were open. So that's what I mean. This is a really bad thing, and it's really bad for the head, the mind, and the soul to see this over and over again without realizing that it is a mass hallucination and an optical illusion. So beware the Zapruder film.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned the Secret Service. Clearly, people would not be on the bridge, but that's not the only thing they did wrong. Windows would never be opened. Okay, that's another thing. And weren't some Secret Service agents told to fall back long before he turned on to Elm Street?
Well, that's based on a film that was shown at Love Field, where one of the principal Secret Service guards of the president was ready to hop on the back of the limousine and stand with using the handhold, and he was waved off and told not to. But there are various stories about that. Some people see that as a obviously a conspiracy to facilitate the killing of the president. But a story that I heard from Henry Gonzalez, Congressman Henry Gonzalez, who was there, he said that it was JFK who said to take off the bubble top, and that it was JFK who wanted the people to see him, and he felt that it would be bad optics, as we call it today, bad optics, to have Secret Servicemen hanging up, standing on the back of the limousine, as if the president wasn't safe. It was very naive, right? Because he wasn't safe. But my theory is that President Kennedy, having had men die under his command in World War II, really didn't have it in himself to accept the death of a Secret Serviceman trying to save him.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about
that he didn't want. Yep. Go ahead, Dr. J.
Have you ever seen John Lear's, some people say it's a fourth generation Zapruder film where it shows the driver turning around and shooting Jack Kennedy?
That's precisely what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So how did he get that as opposed to the sanitized version that I can find on the net now?
He's misinterpreting the same film that William Cooper misinterpreted. The thing they talk about, the silver gun, it's really the sheen coming off the hair of Kellerman, the Secret Service driver. But let me tell you this. Something has been deleted in that section of the film, which is one of the reasons this thing looks fishy and suspect. One of the most suspect things about the film is that the Secret Service driver turns his head from fully looking back to fully looking forward in just 2 frames. Nobody can do that. It's humanly impossible for a human head to turn from looking straight back over the shoulder to straight ahead in 1/9 of a second. 2 frames of the Zapruder film would be 1/9 of a second. That's what I mean by temporal discrepancies involving time and motion studies. That's the other thing that I specialized at Fordham. I specialized in my psychology department in time and motion studies. My goal being to have the fastest reflexes any human being could have. So you have to study how fast the eyes pick up the information, how fast your brain processes it, how fast your brain decides the signal to send through your nervous system to excite the muscles that will do the action that is needed. And the best example is, of course, I dedicated my life. The other part of my career has been Tai Chi Chuan, and I am an acknowledged Tai Chi master, having come out of the toughest Kung Fu schools in Chinatown and evolved through Tai Chi. I can tell you that was really a valuable work I did in time and motion studies. My reaction time is, I'll just say, my reaction time is exquisite to me. I have hands that are so fast that I can catch 3 frisbees at one time if they're within my range of motion, thrown all together at once. I can catch 3 balls thrown simultaneously, often with one hand. But I can get out of the way of stuff that's coming at my head or my body faster than my hands can catch those things. And of course, that comes from having the internal, having access to the bubbling well, the internal spring of energy, which is certain points in your body from which life force flows, and gravity can be harnessed to do amazing martial arts feats. In this case, escape death. So, having that knowledge, I was able to see so many things in the Zapruder film. For example, in the Zapruder film, if you look at all the people in the front, nobody moves. They're all like statues. If you look at all the people on the other side of the street in the background, they're jumping from position to position in impossible ways. For example, the famous little girl, Rosemary Willis, who's seen running and then stopping in the Zapruder film, well, she disappears behind the abutment at frame 99, and the motorcycles come down the street, and there's nobody between frame 99, between the abutment at the corner and the background. And then all of a sudden at frame 130, she appears running full speed, never having crossed the space. So again, amazing, amazing optical illusion. I call it the greatest example of mass mind control the world has ever seen, the ultimate product of MK Ultra. MK Ultra is responsible for the Zapruder film.
One thing that people use, especially magicians, and I'm sure this was the logic when they were doctoring this film and sharing it to the American public, is what the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind perceives. So they figure, okay, well, if they show it to us this way and we hear it that way, then our mind's gonna believe it. But just like you said, when you were watching it in a dark room, you know, at 11 p.m. at night, and you knew in your heart, because you had that connection, that it still wasn't right despite what you were seeing and hearing, then clearly this logic of what the eyes hear and the minds, what the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind perceives, doesn't necessarily always fall true. But for the most part, for the people, as you mentioned in MK Ultra, that is one of the main techniques to control people.
Well, you said the right word, magic. And the basis of stage magic is the precision of your distraction, right? Yes. At the critical moment, there has to be a way to distract the audience. And there were a lot of pre-planned distractions during the assassination. There's so much. I mean, it's actually the subtitle for the Zapruder film is "The Film That Fooled the World." And I've told the story how 2 years before I discovered these things that I've told you about, I was in Switzerland and I decided to take a flight. I rented a plane because I always wanted to fly my own plane around the Matterhorn. So I was very excited about flying in the Swiss Alps. And on the night before I went on that flight, I had the most remarkable dream and it was a lucid dream or remote viewing or out-of-body experience, a full-color dream, that I was in a giant ice cave in the Alps, and I was led into the cave, and there was a desk there, and an old, wizened old man was there. He'd been waiting for a long, long time for me to arrive. And I walk up to his desk, and he says, "Come with me. I am the angel of history. Let me show you what your people have done to themselves." And he led me through the ice cave. And as he was leading me through the ice cave, I saw on the left and the right that there were bodies buried in the ice. On the left side, I saw a beautiful woman in the ice. Blonde hair, buxom, very beautiful. And I said,
Monroe?
Monroe.
Yeah.
Monroe, without a doubt. You know, somebody iced her. Then I walked down a bit following the angel of history, and I looked to the right. And there in the ice was this very tall and handsome man with brown hair, very movie star qualities. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, that guy looks like Burt Lancaster or Kirk Douglas." And, you know, I just had that moment of that association. And we walked on. We came to this part of the cave where my feet wanted to go to the right. They wanted to walk to the right, the slant, the curve of the cave, the floor said go right, but there was this rock wall there. So I can't go there. There's no passage. So he said, "Follow me. Let me show you what your people have done to their history." So we went down this left-hand path. into a narrower ice part of the ice cave. And it kept getting narrower and narrower and lower and lower and lower till it came to an end, a cul-de-sac, a dead end, no way out. And the angel takes the light and he shows me, see what your people have done with your history. They have led you to the end of humanity. This is the end of the human race. You must go back and tell your people they have been walking on the wrong track of history. So the angel and I backed out. It was really crouched down, it was the end. We crouched out, turn around, we walked back out the cave. And I came to that part where the floor wanted me to go right, but the path looked left. So that time I didn't touch the rock, the block that blocked my path. So this time I was curious, and I walked up to it and I touched it, and it turned out to be paper mache and plaster and paint. But it was huge, and it was blocking. This huge facade was blocking the right track of history, where the ice cave grew really big and beautiful. I could see light. I could see the other side at the top. This boulder, fake boulder, this block to our destiny, had started to come apart. I could see it breaking, and if I climbed up, I could break it apart. And there was lumber and all kinds of construction material. And I said, "Oh, it's falling apart, but this is too much for one man. This is too much for one person. I need help." And the angel said, "Yes, you have to go out, and you have to get help, and you have to put your people back on the right track of history." So I back out of the cave, and now when I come out of the cave, where am I? I'm in a theater. I'm in a global theater, and the film starts to roll, and the film is called The Film That Fooled the World. And the film that fooled the world was being shown 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 364 days a year, always running everywhere. And I looked to the right and I saw the people of Europe all mesmerized by the film that fooled the world. And then I looked to the left and I saw all the Asians and the Chinese and the Hindus looking at the film that fooled the world. Then I looked at another segment and it was South America, and another segment and it was Africa. And everyone was in the theater with me watching the film that fooled the world. And there in the front were armed guards guarding, watching the audience to make sure that no one took his eyes off the screen under punishment of death. How do I know? I looked to the right, I glanced to the right, and I saw a guy take his head off, his eyes off the screen, and the guard just shot him in the head. Kaboom! Blast! I saw the head go, oh. And I said, "We've got to get out of here." And in this dream, I was with this very beautiful, sweet Swiss girlfriend named Barbara. And in this dream, I'm with her. That's who I was visiting. And I said, "We got to get out of here. This is hell. I can't sit here anymore. I have to take a chance." So I took her hand and I said, "Barbara, keep looking at the screen and do what I say." "Okay, don't take your eyes off the screen. Barbara, stand up." So she stands up, we stand up. And the guards look at us and we're looking at the screen, so there's no reason to raise the rifle. So we sidestep out. I said, "Come out into the aisle." We both go out into the aisle, sidestepping, looking at the screen. And then the other guards look at us and they go, "Oh, well, he's looking at the screen. I don't have to kill him." So I said, "Barbara, walk backwards." We walked backwards, up the aisle, backwards through the door. And all the guards were such zombies, automaton, robot killers. And like, "I kill only people who take their eyes off the screen. They are looking at the screen. I will not kill them." This is my facetious way of expressing their mentality. So we break out, we go back through the doors, and we rush out to try to get out of the theater. But when I pushed on the doors to the theater, I saw the theater was chained, locked from the outside. Everyone was locked inside the global theater watching the film that fooled the world 24/7, 364 days a year. But I had to find an escape, so I found a spiral stairway, and I followed it. And I said, "Barbara, come." I found a second floor landing, a loge area. I threw open the window. I saw a 50-foot drop into a torrential Swiss river. And I said, "Barbara, it's the only chance we have. We can't stay here. You've got to take the chance." So we both leapt from the window into this raging torrential river, hit feet first, plunged, dropped in about, 25, 30 feet it seemed. And I had her by the hand and I was swimming up and swimming up. I could see the sunlight and a blue, beautiful blue light and the sun shining through the water. And I broke out, took a breath. And what the hell was that all about? And I composed myself and I said, well, it's time to go flying. So I headed off for the airport, got in the airplane, and I flew around the Matterhorn. But the point is, my soul was forewarned that in days to come, I would come upon something which was the film that fooled the world. And I had to get myself out of the global theater safely without being killed. And then I had to unchain the theater, escape, come back, take the chains off the doors of the theater, open it up, expose it to light, ruin the show, and help all of the people that were trapped in the global theater escape from that diabolical place. So
now clearly the symbology is just like you said, the film that fooled the world is the Zapruder film, and with all the people from different nations in that theater with armed guards shooting at them and chained from the outside, watching them over and over. I would have to say, isn't the Zapruder film now one of, if not the most watched film ever in history?
I would have to say it is. I would have to say because it's so short, it's so mesmerizing, it's so confusing, it's so mystifying. It is diabolical. It is the devil's work. It is the product of diabolical psychologists. However, may I say, humbly, that God also put angelic psychologists on this planet to thwart that plan. And that's one of the things I was born to do. And I'm happy to say that about 85% of the population disbelieves the Zapruder film, because many people took it up after I exposed it, got up there and said the emperor has no clothes. It caused a civil war in the JFK research community between the people who could see it and the people who could not accept it. Because there were a whole generation of researchers. Think about 1993, 92 and 93, that's when I broke it open. They'd been studying the Zapruder film for 30 years, really professional, dedicated, sincere researchers. But it had fooled them all and they hadn't seen it. And I did. And so when I came up and said, hey, sorry guys, I respect your work, but you've been fooled. You've been trying to analyze tainted material, doctored evidence. And so there's a lot of hostility and hatred toward me, and also a lot of friendship and support. For example, James Fetzer, Professor James Fetzer, he was sitting in the audience when I debated the world's foremost expert on the Zapruder film, Robert Groden, who tried to ridicule my theories. He tried to mock it. But it wound up exposing him as the handler and the doctor of the Zapruder film. He actually turned out to be a former Army intelligence officer who had served in something called ELINT, Electronic Intelligence, and he was chosen as the handler. That's a kind word for what he did. He was sent out to pawn on the world the fake Zapruder film, because what the Zapruder film is what the government wants you to believe happened in Dealey Plaza, November 22nd, 1963, not what actually happened. The Zapruder film is a prop that props up the single gunman theory. But it's belied a lot of the other films. Well, all the other films of the Zapruder film, interestingly, I discovered this as well. The Muchmore film, the Nix film, and any other film that exists, they're all doctored and they're all cut and spliced at precisely the same moments in time. And to exclude the visible people in the audience, shooters who were standing there before the shooting started, people moving after the shooting. But it's really not necessary to go any farther. It's exposed, and we've had most of the files released, and now we know who did it, why they did it, the mechanics, and if you want to, we can go on. I would like to say that people need to know the reasons why President Kennedy.
Well, that's what I was going to
was
get to
assassinated.
next. Yeah, why in the heck would they assassinate literally a beacon of hope for the entire world, not just the United States, after such turbulent times coming out of World War II?
Right. Well, that's because the deep state and tyranny in general rules by fear. And they had to maintain and instill and maintain a constant state of fear in the American public. But there were obvious reasons or overt reasons why people wanted him killed. Well, let me start off with the civil rights movement. The powers that be blamed Kennedy for giving the black people hope and inspiring them to march and to demand civil rights. Kennedy was very surprised, really. He didn't know the power of his own speeches. And when he met Martin Luther King, they were having demonstrations and agitations, and why are you doing this? Says, well, we're doing this because of you. And he was shocked that he had inspired this reaction of hope in the black population. That was a big one, politically speaking, because part of standing up for civil rights was asserting African Americans' right to vote in the South, which was still heavily repressed. There were poll taxes that black people couldn't pay. There were IQ tests, and we wouldn't call them that, but basically they were literacy tests. You had to prove that you could read and write, and so they put a lot of stumbling blocks in their way, and so that's how this thing got started. Next, again overtly, was President Kennedy's call for world peace and denuclearization.
More than that, actually. Not just denuclearization, like you said, world peace, but he also said we should abolish armies aside from very small national forces. Very small.
Oh, no. No, that's not exactly. What he said was we should abolish national armies and put all our armies in control of the United Nations. That's a very bad one. He was very naive about the nature of the UN, and the UN was different in those days. But that was, global governance is what he was insinuating. He issued the test ban treaty. He called for the test ban, the banning of nuclear weapons on the Earth, under the Earth, in the atmosphere, and underwater and in outer space. So basically banning nuclear testing. So he got the Russians to react to that, but the really bad reaction was on the part of the Nazis that controlled the CIA. I'm not going to mince any words. Yeah. CIA is a Nazi organization. It's not an American organization. It's not called the American Intelligence Agency. It is called the Central Intelligence Agency because it is named after its German origins. The Middle Works, Mittelwerk, Mittelwerk. The middle work, the central works. The Central Works in Germany was the amalgamation that happened in 1943 under Hitler, Himmler, and Albert Speer, the official architect of the Third Reich, to amalgamate science, rocketry, and the intelligence service into one thing called the Central Works. So these are the paperclip Nazis that formed the CIA. They surrendered to the U.S. Army like a Trojan horse. And they brought to our country and into the CIA the Nazi virus, a Trojan. Now we understand the vocabulary. Malware, okay? They introduced malware into our system. The American system was not Nazi. But because we had to accept the entire Nazi intelligence apparatus as a gift, just like the Trojans accepted the horse,
Yeah.
we accepted the gift of Reinhard Gehlen, who surrendered himself, his top officials, advisors, and staff, all of their documentation, and their entire spy network in the Soviet Union that they had been developing since basically really the 1920s. There was an army spy program spying on the communist regime, and then it became the National Socialist intelligence apparatus. And he surrendered it all so that we could have spies in the Soviet Union. We had nothing. And so Truman's army, first it was the army that made the deal with the devil. And then they presented it to Truman as a fait accompli. It was already done. We did this deal with the Germans, and this is the deal. They're going to give us this, and we're going to get the high technology, but we have to give them safe haven and safe harbor and secret transportation. And that caused the rat lines to start shipping the paperclip Nazis over to the United States. Do you want to know something really interesting that I found out a few years ago from an Air Force officer?
Absolutely.
An old Air Force officer who was involved in the Berlin airlift. Okay, so Russia started it blocked off Berlin from the rest of Germany. It blockaded Berlin. No roads in, no railroads or railroads out. It's not on the water, so they have a river, but you couldn't call it a shipping river. And so they blockaded Berlin, and they wanted to starve it and freeze it. And so the United States Army, Air Force, it was the Air Force then in 1948, began the famous Berlin airlift, which was a huge and wonderful propaganda tool. You know, America pouring resources and medicine and food and coal to keep the Berliners warm during these horrible winters when Berlin looked like the moon. That's what we did. We turned Berlin into a moonscape. So I find out 50 years later, it was around 1998, early 2000s, found out from some of those pilots that yes, we were shipping in the food, the coal, the medicines, but who was going back on the empty planes? Paperclip Nazis.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
That's how they were getting them out in droves out of East Germany, right? And out of, well, there was East Germany then. So we, as I put it this way, we hired the Nazis to teach us how to do it. We learned to do it how the Nazis did it. The Nazis died, but we still do it like the Nazis taught us. That's my description of the NSA and the CIA and the deep state and what became of the FBI. President Kennedy made an interesting statement in that secrecy speech. To paraphrase it, you know, he said, what did he say? It would be useless for us to invest so much in secrecy and deception that in the end we become exactly like the forces that we are fighting against. He said it more eloquently, but basically, by following this path of secrecy and deception, we are becoming the thing that we are fighting. And I agree with that. And I say today that we are watching the dismantling of the deep state, and I'm watching it with great satisfaction. I hope to see it fall in my lifetime. And I like to say to people, we're coming up to the 55th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy. And I would like everyone to help make President Kennedy's dying wish come true, which was to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter the pieces to the four winds.
The CIA and the NSA and
we don't need it.
Responsible for the deep state.
Okay, let me explain it this way. At one time, there was a need for it. They made the reason. And the reason was UFO secrecy and keeping out of the public eye, the public mind, the knowledge, the certainty of the alien presence and interference in our affairs on this earth. That's why the CIA, the NSA, and FBI came into this deep state of being, this deep state of being. But with the disclosure that happened last December, with the admission of the United States military, not the deep state, folks, the military is on your side. The military is responsible for saving this nation and its Constitution. So it was the United States Navy and the Pentagon that revealed UFO reality. And with revealing UFO reality, the inference is there is an alien presence. So the reason for being the CIA, the NSA, the FBI's counterintelligence Division 5, they don't have any reason for being anymore, not being in that deep state, because the reason for their being has been exposed. We don't need them to hide the UFO presence, the alien intrusions, the alien intervention in world affairs. It's very interesting that Winston Churchill felt it in World War II, and he wrote in his diary that he often got the strange sensation that there was a third power operating on Earth, and that sometimes it helped the Germans and other times it helped him, or I'd say the Allies. And so, in that statement that Churchill made, we can infer that World War II was a cosmic war in which the nations of the Axis and the Allies were used as pawns by two contending alien presences. And fortunately for us, the angelic aliens who favored the United States and Britain prevailed to some degree. But many diabolicals escaped and insinuated themselves into many, not just the United States, many governments. For example, the Middle East is rife with Nazism and the methodology of Nazism, because many high-ranking Gestapo and SS officers escaped to the Middle East, and they formed the directorates of the ministries of the interior, which is the police, the internal police is always governed by the Ministry of the Interior. So they got those positions, and they taught the Arabs how to do it in the Nazi way. And during World War II, most of Islam was allied with Hitler. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem escaped the British in Iraq, where he had an insurrection. He escaped to Berlin, and Hitler appointed him a field marshal in the SS. So there was a Muslim SS. And this Muslim SS was sent to Yugoslavia, where it committed atrocities that were so horrible that they made the Gestapo wretch in reaction. But let me get back. We're going to talk about the secret space program and the principal reason why President Kennedy was killed. His November 12th memo to the CIA, the NSA, to NASA, telling them that he wanted them to begin scientific exchanges with the Soviet Union through the Russian Academy of Sciences. Yes. He wanted NASA to start working with the Soviet Space Agency on joint ventures in space and perhaps a joint mission to the moon. But most importantly, in that memo, he ordered the CIA and the NSA to collate all UFO data. He referred to them as unknowns. He said he wanted a list of all unknowns that were on the record. He wanted them divided into the unknowns that were secret projects of the CIA, secret projects of the three services of the United States military, secret projects of the NSA, secret projects of the Russians, and he was very interested in whatever was left over, the unexplained unknowns, the UFOs. And he was so concerned with this that I actually have in my files, in my archive, a doodle. JFK used to have a pad, a white pad, and he used to doodle incessantly. And he would throw them away, and his secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, used to pick them out and save them. So one of these doodles is a fascinating little thing. It's a drawing of the Earth, a drawing of the world. Off to the left side is a little man, almost like a Chinese stick figure. Then a big curve into space, and then there are 5 lozenges, 5 diamonds, and then it continues onto the moon, and the arc goes, the man on the Earth, the 5 diamonds, arcs to man on the moon. But over the Earth, he's got all of these oval shapes that look like UFOs, and some of them have a dollar sign in them, and others have another sign in them, and others have no sign in them at all. And I think that in that little drawing, he was showing the US unknowns, the Russian unknowns, and the big unknowns, the UFOs, and they're over the North Pole in his drawing. It's a fascinating doodle. It was released by the JFK Library way back in the late 1990s, but I have never forgotten it. So the secret space program was a big deal, and a great bone of contention between President Kennedy and NASA was the trip to the moon. NASA did not want to go to the moon. And James R. Webb, after whom the James R. Webb telescope is named, he's a very, very interesting guy. He is the man who engineered and manufactured the military-industrial complex. He engineered and retooled American industry into the military-industrial complex, because in World War II, he was the director of Office of Management and Budget. And it was he who would negotiate all of the contracts between the giant industrialists and the giant aerospace manufacturers like Boeing and Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas. And he was the guy that would do the glad handing and the shake hands and sign the contracts and dole out the contracts. He was incredibly powerful from World War II throughout the Eisenhower administration. Then he was chosen to head NASA. So in 1961, this young whippersnapper comes into Washington, into the presidency, and he starts telling NASA what to do. And he starts telling James R. Webb, no, I got plans, and we have plans, because the Russians have plans. The Russians plan. They've beaten us into outer space, and we're playing catch-up. So we have to get on the program, and we have to go to the moon. The Russians want to go to the moon. If the Russians get to the moon first, they will prove that communism is a better system, a superior system to capitalism. We have to get to the moon before the Russians, because if we lose the space race, we lose the technology race, we lose the science race, and we lose prestige all over the world. We have to beat the Russians to get to the moon. And James R. Webb balks. And this I know because I heard the two of them. I've heard James R. Webb, director of NASA, arguing with President Kennedy, saying, no, we can't do that. We have no hope. We don't see that until the 1970s. President Kennedy says, no, it's not going to be the 1970s. We have to do it in this decade. We have to go to the moon in this decade and get there before the Russians. And he says, no, but we have plans for the space station. And he said, the space station is going to have to wait. He said, you don't understand. We already have a plan. We have to take control of local space. He was talking about the militarization of space. James R. Webb and Werner von Braun, at the time that President Kennedy came into office, had no inclination, no plans to go to the moon. Their plan was a giant space station, the big wheeled space station that you saw in Walt Disney's uh, uh, Tomorrowland and in the documentary. And folks, let me tell you something. We do have that space station. I have seen it. It is there. It is hiding in outer space. They lifted the veil one time only, and I was awake at 5 o'clock in the morning to see it. And that was on the night that the Atlantis shuttle came back from outer space for the last shuttle ride, the return of Atlantis to Earth. And I stayed up that night watching the whole thing from 2 o'clock in the morning till the landing, which was about 5:30 in the morning. And as I'm watching, these guys are attached to this quote-unquote space station, which everybody thinks was the ISS. So did I. So listen to what happened. The space shuttle is attached to the space station, and they drop away. And the maneuver called for two things. It drops away, and then it does an inside loop. It goes over, up, over, upside down, down and around, back to its original position. Then it backed off hundreds of feet, and it stood away and stood off. And then it called for the station to be rotated 90 degrees. So I'm watching this thing, and the thing rotates 90 degrees, and it turns into a giant wheel with the spokes and the arms and the ring. And it was the same thing that I saw in the model in Werner von Braun's hands in 1954. We have a space station, folks. This is the secret space program that President Trump is saying we're going to have it. Folks, we have it. It's already there. We have the UFOs. We have reverse engineered spacecraft. I have videos of flight tests on February 7th, 1989 at Area 51. There was a flight test of anti-gravitational propulsion.
Now, 89, is that the same? That's when Bob Lazar was working at S4, right?
That's right. Those are the years where he is purported to have been there. And it's actually, let's see, the 89 would have been the end of the end of Bush's, the beginning of Bush's first term.
Yeah, Bush, Herbert
right?
Walker Bush. That's right.
Yeah, George. So that exists, and that's on YouTube. A good fellow named DSW 74, I believe is his handle, and he has Area 51 videotape leaked, and I was lucky enough to download it about 5 years ago. And what we have, running the circuit at Area 51 in this video are what I call the white pearl UFOs. They're perfectly spherical. They're like ping pong balls, giant ping pong balls. Ping pong balls that I would say are a little bigger than a Humvee. And I have the video of 3 of them making the circuit. We're going around and around and around, overflying Area 51. And it is Area 51 without a doubt. It's not something that anybody could fake. Because I know what Area 51, I studied the film, and then I was able to get correlation from aerial photography of the different buildings and structures there. So it's pretty cool, Flash Gordon lives. I think that JFK his alter ego was Flash Gordon, and I think that Donald Trump's alter ego is Flash Gordon, like Flash Gordon's my alter ego, because Donald Trump and I grew up in exactly the same years in exactly the same city, watching exactly the same programs, and I can tell you he was watching Captain Video, where Captain Video would come out and he had a robot, and he would go over to the robot's stomach and open 2 doors, and there would be a TV set in there, and that's how the serial, they'd zoom into the TV set and cut to the serial. So the president has said that we are going to Mars. He said it, and he said this, he says, we're going to have a Space Force, we're going back to the moon, and we're even going to Mars. And I want to go to Mars at least by the end of my second term, if not the end of my first term. That's pretty ambitious,
Very. Oh, yes, very.
So
They've actually asked for volunteers at this point because
yeah,
most people who go, how are they going to come back?
They're recruiting for the Space Force right now.
Oh, I know that for the Space Force. I'm talking about Mars. The Mars project.
Mars. Yeah, well, there are a lot of people. See, Dr. J, I really do believe that humanity came from Mars. That's my belief. There's a longing to understand and to know and to get back to the garden. The Garden of Eden could have been on Mars. Who knows? Or there may have been more than one. But whatever it is, I do believe that there was a civilization on Mars. It was a very highly evolved civilization. It got involved in an interplanetary war. It won a Pyrrhic victory. It destroyed the planet that formed the asteroid belt. But in destroying that, in that war, it suffered such an environmental cataclysm that most of the civilization was wiped out. But enough of them survived and journeyed to Earth to plant the seed of the Martian remnant in a proto-hominid. That's what my belief is, that the Martian remnant survived, made it to Earth, had been coming to Earth. It's probably, they had colonized Earth already. But the ones that survived came here, and they knew that they were too few in numbers to ever repopulate a full-fledged Martian race. But they knew that their genes were superior, their genes were dominant, and would express themselves more readily. But they needed a matrix, they needed an envelope to protect it. And they chose the proto-hominid. And probably said, you know, she's kind of hairy, kind of cute though, and our only hope. So let's plant the seed of the Martians in this creature and see what comes out. And perhaps in 10,000, 20,000 years, with our superior Martian genes and their superior expression, their dominance. We have dominant genes and recessive genes. They would think of themselves as dominant genes, that they would express themselves and produce a hybrid that would be part Martian, part proto-hominid, and in time, perhaps, restore a large proportion of the Martian genome, which is the human genome. That's my theory.
Panspermia, that's also what it's called, and a lot of scientists are actually looking at that life not only originated from there, but some asteroid or something may have hit it and launched something into the atmosphere, and then over time it landed here on Earth and thus created that. Also, there's the other theories that other life forms brought the life here to Earth. But then again, if we are the human genome from Mars, then that also begs the question, who brought them to Mars to begin with? And
right, well, then we get to Anunnaki, right?
That's right, that's right. And honestly, when you think about it, when there's so many places, the Goldilocks planets, that we have already identified as, you know, not too cold, not too hot, you know, water and oxygen. Well, I personally would think that Homo sapiens probably is just, this is a guess of mine and a dream obviously to have, is probably that we also are existing on multiple different planets in different solar systems and even in other galaxies. I mean, why wouldn't we? Wouldn't that make sense if you're the Anunnaki who's creating all this life and putting them on different places and terraforming different homes, I guess it would be a good word for them. But at the same time, why not put them in different planets? That way you could monitor them and see how they go and see how if they can reach that level of peace without destroying themselves. That's what I would do if I was a scientist. You wouldn't do one experiment and put all your eggs in one basket. You would have multiple. That's just a thought. What do you think about that?
Dr. J?
Yeah, I was going to say, Robert.
I think we've lost Robert.
Yeah, Robert, you still there? Okay, so
I'm here. I'm
okay, you
sorry.
are there. I was just asking. I was like waiting for you. I was like,
I'm sorry.
am I not
Mike,
catching it? Did you catch what I was saying? My idea about
yes,
that.
yes,
What do
yes.
you
And I
think
was
about that
answering.
idea?
Mike was muted because we had the sound of
Ah, yeah,
news
yeah.
going. So, yes, I agree with you, and I also agree with the theory of panspermia. And there's much more evidence for it now than ever before,
Yes.
because during the last decade, scientists have found meteorites and analyzed the internal constituents of these meteorites, and they have found three of the four amino acids that are the basis of DNA: cytosine, adenine, guanine, and thiamine. And three of those have been found inside meteors. So panspermia lives. The other interesting thing I discovered, my friend and I do science together, and we discovered in a very, very interesting college science book on chemistry, that carbon is formed in the atmosphere when cosmic rays strike the upper atmosphere. It starts a series of collisions and cascades, which ultimately produce carbon, and carbon rain down from the atmosphere down into the earth. And so this is another source of carbon that I don't think many people or many scientists have considered. And if we are a carbon-based life form, as we are, then this discovery and this theory that carbon rained down from the sky means that our constituents were formed by cosmic particles, cosmic rays, that rained down into the atmosphere and precipitated carbon, and carbon rained down onto the earth, and then it aggregated into all these wonderful forms of organic life. So we are star beings, and it is a fact that every molecule, every atom in our beings right now originated in the sun or traveled here on cosmic rays. It's a really fascinating view that we now have of human evolution, and genetics is a wonderful field of study. It's opening up, it's opening up our true histories to ourselves. It certainly did for me. I had my DNA done last year.
I remember you actually talked about that during the Confessions of Robert
You're right.
Morningstar. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
want that audio. I really have to have that audio for my files. That was really interesting. Dr. J, you have a wonderful way of drawing out from the heart of a person. You know, it's really wonderful to speak with somebody who is able to draw that out in confidence, with trust, and in all honesty. And there's nothing for me more pleasurable than actually just telling the truth about what I know, about what I've experienced, and helping shattered illusions. When my illusions were shattered. Well, that's a good thing. It's not good to live in illusions. The Zapruder film was an illusion that I shattered, and I'm very proud of that, because I feel that as a psychologist and a parapsychologist, I do mass psychology, mass psychotherapy. And when people listen to me and hear me and then go study the things that I point out, like the doctrine of the Zapruder film, there is a kind of healing that's happening on a mental level and an emotional level. The Zapruder film drives people very mad. It makes people angry.
Oh,
A
yeah.
sense of terrible injustice, a horrible, horrific crime. And that's part of the terror that I say this deep state wants to keep you in a state of dread and fear and panic and paranoia. Because the message of the Zapruder film is, and the autopsy pictures, which are not President Kennedy, they're meant to terrify you. They're meant to say to you, listen here, little man, don't try it. Look at what we did to this president. Ha ha.
Yeah,
He thought he was the president of the United States. What do you think's going to happen to you if you come out and start telling the truth?
that's right.
Be
That's
afraid,
right.
little man. Be afraid, little man. I'm taking that term, little man, from Wilhelm Reich, who wrote a book called Listen Here, Little Man. So, in honor of Dr. Wilhelm Reich. I use this term.
And speaking of which, JFK, this is going to be a link to what's happening now with President Trump. QAnon, a lot of the times when he posts, he writes, "Where we go one, we go all." And I asked this to a lot of people, where does that come from? Surprisingly, a lot of people don't know, but I bet you know the answer. I could tell you, obviously, but I'm guessing you would know
No,
the
please
answer.
tell me, because
You don't.
No, I would
It's
say
on the bell of JFK's boat.
Well, I never visited the boat.
Well, yeah, neither have I. But I mean, I've seen the pictures of it. But that's where it goes from. And I'm sure you know about
Which
this
boat?
too.
The Honey Fitz?
I don't remember
yacht?
the name.
The yacht
of it. I
sailboat?
believe it's the yacht.
The
Honestly,
yacht.
he had a few because he was a big, he was big into that. So I don't recall which one it was.
Speaking of the yacht, you sparked my memory. There is a story that in June of 1962, President Kennedy was out on the Honey Fitz's yacht off Martha's Vineyard. And a UFO came down and parked itself about 200 feet from the yacht and about 60 feet off the water. And when the people, his guests, his cousin is the source of this story, when they saw the UFO, everybody freaked out. The Secret Service went crazy. Everybody went bonkers. The president kept looking at it, grabbed binoculars. As he was watching it, the UFO went vertically, whoop, straight up into outer space. And they took everyone aside and said, you can never tell anybody about this. This is top secret. And swore everyone to secrecy, except one of his guests was his cousin. She went home and told her husband, and her husband came out with the story back in the 1990s. But that says to me, it rings true, okay? It rings true because it was during that last year that he really became totally obsessed with telling America the truth about UFOs, getting to the bottom of it all. He was being stonewalled. But another incident, lesser known, but maybe even more important than this personal sighting, must have been a real trip, exciting personal trip. You know, the Secret Service was worried, man. If a UFO can come down 60 feet from the president's yacht, what else?
It is his yacht, by the way. I'm reading it right now. It's actually JFK's yacht. It's the bell. Where we go one, we go all.
I see. Well, thank you for that. I was thinking in Three Musketeers, you know, all for one.
That's true.
That would have been my answer. But to get back to it, let me just tell you this. 12 days after President Kennedy was inaugurated, that would be February 2nd of 1961, a massive UFO event happened over Europe, where a gigantic armada of UFOs was picked up on radar, flying over Eastern Europe and heading toward the NATO nations. NATO was put on alert. They thought it might be a Soviet nuclear attack. So they went to DEFCON 1, and they watched this armada overfly East Poland, East Germany, West Germany, France, England. Then they turned north over the North Sea and overflew the Scandinavian countries, and then headed back over Finland, back toward Russia, and disappeared. President Kennedy got word that this was going on. He got, imagine, 12 days into the presidency, he's awakened in the middle of the night and told, we have a serious situation in Europe, cosmic top secret. That's the way the NATO nations designate ultra, you know? And he had to deal with this idea, you know, holy mackerel, you know, is this the Russians going to nuke Western Europe? Are they starting a nuclear war? We don't know. Why didn't we know? Well, we didn't know because we weren't communicating with Russia as we do today. And we didn't know who's running the UFOs and whether the UFOs belong to Russia. Was Russia playing games with us to freak us out, to make us jumpy? Or was Russia being threatened in the same way? Well, it turns out that after President Kennedy spoke with Khrushchev and expressed his dismay, asked him, you know, do you have these craft? Are you doing this stuff? No, it's not ours. We do it. They're doing it to us too. So he discerned that there was one faction of UFOs that was trying to goad us into nuclear war. They were trying to trick the United States into thinking that Russia was attacking them to initiate retaliation. And other times they do it to Russia to make them think that the United States was attacking them and to provoke a reaction. So Kennedy became very worried about this prospect, which was that the United States and Russia might destroy each other by mistake, confusing UFOs for a Russian or an American attack. So he wanted to clear that all up, and that's why the memo makes so much sense. He wanted from the NSA, what are CIA, what are NSA, what are Army, Navy, Air Force secret projects, what are Russian secret projects, what's left over, and who owns the leftovers. And he told them, I want you to prepare a white paper for February of 1964, because he planned to tell the American people after winning the 1964 election about the crash at Roswell, the alien presence, and the implications for mankind. That was just too much. Combine that with calling for a ban on all nuclear weapons, then you see the quandary, the paradox of the military at that time. Wow, he wants to tell the people about flying saucers and aliens, and he wants to deny us the only weapon that we have to fight them. The only defense that America and Russia and Britain and France had against UFOs was a nuclear weapon, a nuclear threat. And here Kennedy was saying, nah, we got to stop testing them. We have to stop making them bigger. We have to cut them down. And then whatever's left over, we ought to put in the hands of the United Nations and make a United Nations military and a United Nations army. That's why people went crazy and felt that he was being a traitor and that he was possibly a communist plant subverting our way of life. Those are all the things they used to say about him. By the way, Dr. J, I'd like to make an announcement. Next Sunday, as you know, I do have a radio show on Revolution Radio on Sundays at 3. Next week, I'm going to interview a very interesting woman. Her name is Miss Robin Haynes, and she's written a book. She sent it to me about 5 years ago. It was very shocking, but it's very well supported. She supports her opinion, and her opinion is that President Kennedy deserved to be killed. Oh. She believes that the things he did were so outrageous and so threatening to the existence of the United States in 1963 that it's easy to understand how the military-industrial complex and the CIA misconstrued his intentions and the outcomes, and she thinks that they were justified in assassinating him. But at the same time, she is incredibly irate and angry at George H.W. Bush, whom she has also found to have been one of the masterminds, and she insists that she wants to see him brought to justice before he dies. It's a very interesting thesis, and I'm going to have Miss Robin Haynes on my show next Sunday at 3 on Revolution Radio, Studio A. It's amazing. We're coming up 55 years.
I know, and it's actually every year more and more people, even this generation or the millennials, know or start to believe the fact that, hey, this lone gunman theory, Lee Harvey Oswald, was not the shooter. And again, when we were talking yesterday about these, just the first thing that I recognized, just as a child, watching the physics of the film, of the Zapruder film, how would the head go backwards? And let me ask you real quick, when you were talking about the Armada over Europe and you said cosmic top secret, are you talking about SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe with Robert Dean?
Yes, exactly. Robert Dean is the one who made me aware of that event. And you can really call it a seminal event in President Kennedy's experience. Imagine just 12 days into his presidency to be awakened with such an ominous threat, and to have to start thinking about the prospect of some intelligence trying to trick us into overreacting and to cause nuclear war. Which leads us to this, again, let me go back to Churchill. He felt in World War II that there was an unseen power on this planet that almost magically was helping him avert disaster, and all the times helping the Germans. But most of the time, divine providence was seemed to have been on our side. There's a wonderful book. In England, there are a lot of wonderful books, I have to say. And when I was there in the mid-1990s studying with the Druid Order, I had access to a tremendous number of books. I bought a lot of UFO books that are not available in America that I brought back. But one of the books that I came across in the Druid Library was The Magical Battle of Britain by Dion Fortune. And just as we know that the Nazi regime was very occult and heavily into black magic, trying to enlist the aid of Mephistopheles and Lucifer himself to their cause, a story which is told in the movie The Damned. So in the Magical Battle of Britain, Churchill and the Ministry of Defense find out that there is an occult bureau in Nazism, and that this occult bureau is using black magic and perverted science to try to win the war. So what they did is they enlisted the most notable spiritualists and psychics in Great Britain to bring them together to do seances, basically what we call seances or meditations in a circle. And what they would do is they would lay out a map of Europe and the battle areas, the battle zones, and the spiritualists would start to conjure. They would start to invoke and conjure entities like St. Michael the Archangel, King Arthur, and Merlin to help them divine the intentions of the Nazis. I like the word, the use of the word, to divine.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, because it was very high-level spiritual meditation. Imagine trying to tune into an archangel like St. Michael, or the great King Arthur, or the magic of Merlin the magician to come and save the British Isles. And there were some miracles. There's some really interesting miracles associated with the Battle of Britain. But here in the Magical Battle of Britain, let me stay focused on the seance. They would lay out a map of Europe and concentrate on the different battle zones like North Africa and Central Europe. And what they would see, they claim to have seen, they would see a beam of light, a thin red beam of light come into the room and point to a spot on the map. And then they put all of their attention on that point, that spot on the map, and start to divine what was going on. And they had many, what we call in parapsychology, they had many hits. They pointed British intelligence to go to certain places in Europe and to see what was going on there because they picked up something during the seance. And these apparitions would come and also speak to them and tell them where the Axis powers were doing their black magic act to try to win the war. And they were able to thwart many German operations by the use of psychism. And yet, formal science always denied it and continues to deny it, while at the same time collecting huge contracts to study it and develop it and report it, and all of its manifestations and aspects. Psychic warfare. We are engaged in a spiritual warfare. This is what it's really all about. One book that I recommend to everyone who wants to know about the occult nature of the Third Reich and what World War II was really about on the spiritual level, it's called The Spear of Destiny by Trevor Ravenscroft. The Spear of Destiny. Now, the Spear of Destiny is supposedly the spear tip of the lance that pierced Christ's side on the cross. And legend has it that when it pierced Christ's side and it was infused with his blood and his chi, his power, that a legend grew around that whoever possessed the lance would determine the destiny of the world for good or ill. And so Hitler came upon this legend from Parsifal, and in 1914, during the war, he was in Vienna, where this object, this relic, resided in the Rijksmuseum, and he went there to contemplate it, as did Rudolf Steiner, who is a source of a lot of this information. Rudolf Steiner was also a psychic, as was Hitler, and he found out about Hitler way back when, in Hitler's tramp days. And he found out that Hitler had broken the code in the ring, the Wagnerian ring cycle, which is a story of the Teutonic Knights and their quest for the Grail. So he discerned that this guy was around, interested in the occult, and he wanted to acquire the Spear of Destiny. So the whole rest of Hitler's life, World War I, to become a hero in the German army, he was quite a hero. He survived through his psychic powers. I'll give you one example of Hitler's psychic powers. Hitler is in one of the trenches. When I say he was a hero, he received several medals, including an Iron Cross, for being a courier. He would take messages. He would take the message from one trench into another. He'd go out through no man's land, ferret about, find his way, get the messages. So anyway, Hitler was in a bunker in one of these trenches, and he was sound asleep. And all of a sudden, he had a dream that he was suffocating. He was covered in earth, and the earth covered him, and he was suffocating, and he couldn't breathe. And in this dream, he just broke out of the dream in a frenzy and screamed and ran out of the bunker. Just whoop, he woke up and bailed out of the bunker. And as soon as he left the bunker, a shell came in, destroyed it, and killed everybody else in there who had been in there sleeping with him. So he felt that he had this psychic ability, or the psychic power was protecting him, because he had a world historic destiny, which he obviously did. And so it leads me to believe that there are these forces that are acting through certain human beings, manipulating some through goodness and manipulating others through evil, and in its own designs. And they're playing a great four-dimensional chess game on the planet Earth. And the resources of the Earth are what they are vying for. Water, minerals, human life, souls, genetic material, all of the above. So, but we're lucky enough to be living in this wonderful age where we can now speak openly about this. Dr. J and I would have been disappeared in the 1960s for having the audacity to broach such subjects on the airwaves. The Air Force had, they talk about FEMA camps now. Well, the U.S. Air Force had their own version of FEMA camps, and the CIA had them. They're called the Farm. And it was very much like the TV show with Patrick McGowan, The Prisoner, where he just woke up one day and he lives in this wacky place where all these people are kept and nobody can escape. Well, that's where they used to send people and their families who had close encounters with UFOs, who had alien abductions, who were known alien abductees. They were very paranoid because they felt that the aliens were manipulating the abductee and perhaps programming them to become sleepers at a future time. They were also disturbed by the fact that many abductees came out of the experience with enhanced psychic abilities, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, psychometry. I have
Let
a
me
theory about how that works too.
Well, let me hear that theory. I was going to say we have about 10 minutes left, and I was going to jump to current president right now, but we could do that next time because right now we're talking, well, we've talked about a lot of things, and we started with JFK, but I want to know about this theory, and I know everybody listening wants to hear this theory.
Let me see. Give me a lead. Give me a lead, would you?
Sure.
Good. Ask me a question.
Well, what I would personally...
More specific.
Okay, personally, you were talking about some people who have been abducted or come in contact have more psychic abilities. And I would think that would be because those that they come in contact with unlock those activities in our brain. I think that every human is inherent, has those abilities, but for some reason, whether it be from the deep state or going back even further than that, that we have been suppressed that ability. Have I ever told you the Tower of Babel story?
I'd like to hear it, but I'd like to say to you, I elicited from you the answer that I was going to give. And it is that in our indoctrination, what we call education under the science paradigm, that indoctrination cuts off these faculties. It suppresses them as we're growing up. It tells us not to believe in our dreams, that's superstition, not to believe in our intuition, to deny our instincts, to be rational, to be logical. And the universe is neither rational nor logical. These are two concepts that we've imposed on the universe. The universe is chaos. It is we who impose order on it, and that rationality and logic is part of it, but it incarcerates us in a very real, materialistic jail. It's like the carcerand. You remember the carcerand, a molecule that Buckminster Fuller invented? It was a molecule that trapped another molecule inside it. So you could control the molecule inside and deliver it to wherever you wanted it to be delivered. So as we're growing up, we are born with these powers innately. And if we had natural development, they would be part of our nature. But they are scolded out of us. They are ridiculed out of us. And by the time we reach 10th grade, 12th grade, it has been suppressed. And we are told that science is it. Science is the authority. Anything that science doesn't acknowledge doesn't exist. And all of a sudden, zip, here comes this flying saucer, breaks all the rules of physics, all the rules of science. In some cases, outsteps an alien, makes direct telepathic contact with your mind. You hear his thoughts in your head. You don't hear words. And all of those imposed delusions and denials fall away. They fall away. And there's a resurgence of your natural soul powers. Because you know that everything you were told was a lie. It wasn't true. Flying saucers do exist. UFOs can appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. Aliens can come right through walls, appear in your living room, interact with you positively or negatively, and then disappear in the blink of an eye. You're left with that. You say, well, the world isn't exactly the way they told me, but as a result of that shock, you are restored. Your psychic life, your soul powers are restored to you. Your curiosity, of course, a lot of people don't want to hear it, don't want to know what happened. But I think the majority are very curious about what happened, what changed me. I know from my personal experience that is so.
Let me say this to you, because we do have a little over 5 minutes left. Linear thought, I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have by imposing that. For instance, when we're children, I'm talking about before we're sent to school, your mind is probably way better off than you become after your forced linear thought. For instance, speaking, right? Instead of using your three-dimensional emotions and your feelings and everything like that, you have to put it into words. And if you're not a good orator, if you're not a good communicator, then you really can't convey things the way you're supposed to. And that's why when we were talking about these abilities being innate to humans, I always thought that has to be the case because, for instance, the reason I was telling you the Tower of Babel story, Dr. Roger Lear, may rest in peace, told me that up until then, every single human had the ability to communicate telepathically. And when the Bible speaks about everyone speaking in tongues, it wasn't that they all of a sudden were speaking, rambling different languages or things that didn't make sense. What happened is that their ability to telepathically communicate telepathically was shut down. And therefore they were forced for the first times to use their mouths to speak. And if you think about it, that actually would make more sense of what we're supposed to do. Because shouldn't we be able to not only communicate with humans, but with other beings? Dolphins, they say, actually are very intelligent. I mean, I'm not going to say we're sitting here and going to have a conversation with dolphins. The point is you can have a pet and you can sort of sense what it's feeling or if it's sad or if it's happy. That ability for us to sense, I think, can be so much more enhanced if it wasn't for the linear thought that suppressed us in school. What do you say
actually,
about
linear thought, I agree. Linear thought is something that imposes upon us an illusory sense of time.
Yes.
It makes us believe that time is a one-way flow. And the reality is we are all living in individual spheres of time. And we correlate. We're time travelers. And it's very easy to explain this time travel. I have a thought. I have the thought before it manifests. But I have to innervate that thought, to innervate the muscles of my throat, to disturb the air for the words, so-called words, sound, to propagate. And then it arrives in your ear, and you have to decode those sounds and turn them into neural impulses that go to your brain, and then you realize you have my idea, right? So for that to happen, I have to be in the future and you have to be in the past, it's just a fact. I speak, you're in the past. While I'm speaking, you're hearing. Then you speak, and then I have to switch. We're traveling back and forth, like two cars, going on the highway. One backs off for a little while, and then the other one comes forward. But none of us we're not living in the present. There is no present. There is no now. Between the N in now and the W in ow, a lot has changed. It's not constant. Everything has changed, microsecond to microsecond. And so the linear thinking imposes on us this illusion that we are on a one-track rail of time, and we can jump the rails. And that's what the ability is, and it's a spiritual ability. Your body has to stay glued to the rails, but your spiritual abilities can see beyond the rails and beyond the tracks and in all directions. And those are the faculties you have to develop. If you're interested. If you're not interested, if you're happy living in your carceran, being a little prisoner of science, with your little limited, comfortable bubble of ideas, and don't want to explore the why and the wherefore, then you ask a person, why are you here? Why were you born? What's your purpose? To go to work every day at 8 o'clock? No. Every single one of you, any one of us listening tonight, we were put on this. Oh, we weren't put. We swam to this planet. Dr. J, someday I'm going to have to tell you about my hypnotic regression experience to my own conception. And remembering my identity as a sperm cell, looking for safety, looking for I knew not what. I was looking for safe harbor. And this sperm cell was swimming in one direction and found cold and knew that the cold would kill it. Swam in another direction, it got warm and knew the warmth was comfortable and sailed toward it. Flew, went too far the other way, got cold again. It was homing in on heat. And this heat, infrared sensing, led me to the egg. And then I knew it was the egg. I knew I had to get inside.
That's where you knew the safety was. And Robert, unfortunately, we are literally out of time, and that is definitely something that we will have to talk much more in depth.
Sure,
this is why I always bring you on. Every show is different. There is so much about you. That's why I always say you're not just a guest, you're not just a host, you're an amazing friend. For years going back, every time we've ever spoken, you've woken my abilities of you definitely have brought so much knowledge to me and to all the people listening globally. Now, real quick, I wanted you to plug in your website, again, your shows, and anything else you want to plug in before we
Okay, I'm happy to say we're back online with UFO Digest, and we're going to have a very interesting article called Corporate Fascism. Is Corporate Fascism Already in Control? And it's a warning that we should not worry so much about the government taking away our rights while corporate fascism is already doing it. And the arguments are there by Steve Erdman. I have a show on this station on Wednesday at 9 o'clock, and I urge you to tune in to Scott Teeters and I having a regular 2-hour shows on Wednesdays. And, have a good life. It is a good life. Be happy. Do good. What else can I say to you? I'm happy to be alive. I'm looking forward to the next 40 years. It is within reach. We discovered wonderful things. We should have a show on the new discoveries in biochemistry and restoration, rejuvenation of DNA. But that's what I have to say, folks. It's a beautiful life. You're a wonderful person. You have a great life yourself. Find out what your purpose is, and you'll find happiness. And thank you, Dr. J, for having me on the show. And thank you, Daryl, for being there. And Katie, all are greatly appreciated.
And again, that's who I have to thank. Katie and Daryl Neely, they are the managers of Late Night in the Midlands. They are the audio engineers. Very hands-on. They do so much for this network. I have to thank them. And of course, Michael Varr, the owner of the Late Night in the Midlands network. If it wasn't for him starting this network, we wouldn't have had this opportunity to spread this information. Also in the UK theater, we have to thank JC. Two people I want to thank that are behind the scenes is Adam Keene. He also goes by Adaraki Studios. He is one of my moderators, my top moderator, and actually is an editor, plus so much more. There's too many titles to list. And of course, Pam Vrettenberg. She is my social media manager, runs UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Now, let me finally lead you with one thing. The same thing I say every show, folks. The only thing you have to remember with regards to the show is the name of it. That's right. Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. Again, drjradiolive.com. I don't have to list today every single social media site, but you all know it. It's all the same. DRJ Radio Live. With that being said, you guys got another show coming on, so I officially have to say good night for those of you in the East Coast and for those of us in the West Coast, and good morning for those of you in the EU and the UK. With that being said, like I said, I'm officially signing off.